This is most likely the shallowest 4U server chassis on the market, measuring at only 348 millimeters or 13.7 inches deep. And I have it because I'm a stubborn nerd that doesn't think things through. Let's talk about it. I got my gigabit fiber internet about a month before the pandemic started. And due to all the lockdowns, I had heaps of time on my hands to invest into a new hobby. As a huge gearhead, I probably don't even need to explain that this new hobby became networking, or more specifically, building myself a home lab. Of course, when gathering new information about projects like this, one quickly stumbles upon the world's biggest forum where people have opinion, well, about everything. Twitter, Reddit. The amount of damn sexy racks on the Home Lab subreddit was just staggering, and I knew immediately where I had to start. I needed to buy myself a rack. Having no prior experience with these, I only had one metric: price to performance ratio. Or, to put it differently, how much units I'm willing to pay how much money for. By the way, if you don't know what a rack unit is, it's the unit of measure defined as 1 3/4 inches or 44.45 millimeters, and it's the smallest height of piece of networking, server or audio gear. So if we say a certain chassis is 4U, that means it's 4 times 1.1 3/4 of inches in height. I hope that makes sense. Apart from the router, which I received from the ISP, I also had the UniFi gateway, a hardware cloud key, and the UniFi switch, which meant my rack had to accommodate a 1U shelf and another U for the switch. Additionally, I knew I needed a server, and I was thinking 4U should be enough for that. And of course, no rack is complete without the UPS, so add 2 more U. This brings us to a total of 8 U, but I wanted to be on the safe side for any additional purchases such as a shelf or a patch panel, so I settled on 12. Once this decision was made, I found the perfect candidate, put it into the shopping basket and made an order. After a couple of days went by, my rack finally arrived. After a couple of days went by, my rack finally arrived. It was absolutely beautiful. Felt like an empty canvas for the artist in me to start sculpting his next masterpiece in. And start I did, and masterpiece I thought it was. Until I started looking or shopping for a server. You see, there's 2 kinds of racks: server racks and network racks. And I bought a network rack. What's the difference, you might ask? Well, it's the fucking depth. Network racks are usually much shorter, or should I say shallower than server racks. My rack, for example, was only 40 centimeters deep, which limited me to, well, almost 0 cases. Almost. Now, the first thing any sane and reasonable human being would do is put the rack on some second-hand marketplace, sell it, then use those funds to buy a deeper one. And since I'm neither, I decided I will stick with it no matter what and try my best to find the shallowest server cases out there. It took a while, but eventually I succeeded. I found this Advantech ACP 4020 short depth chassis that, interestingly enough, doesn't only accommodate ATX motherboards but also have size SBC motherboards. And most importantly, it's only 35 centimeters deep. But even then, when I put it into the rack, the gap between the back wall of the case and the wall of the rack is so small that I still needed to cut some of the plastic off the power cable so it would fit. Don't try this at home, by the way. If you haven't heard of Advantech yet, I don't blame you, as they aren't known in the consumer space. They mostly provide industrial grade gear to other companies. I won't go into details what the difference is, as I'm planning another video on that, but what you should know is that these kind of deals usually involve buying thousands of units at a time rather than just one. That being said, I thought to myself, there's absolutely nothing to lose if I reach out to the EU office in Warsaw, Poland, and to my surprise, a nice man named Pavel replied that it is indeed possible to buy just one. Yay! Without hesitation, I wired the funds and it was shipped the day after. Thank you, Pavel. Now, let's look at the internals. Because I've never owned the 2-socket server motherboard, I got myself this Gigabyte one, which I'll link to in the description down below. Oh, and if you want to know what the difference between a regular consumer and the server motherboard is, I actually made a video a couple of months ago. I'll provide the link in the description and up here. Refurbished, I think this motherboard cost me around 200 euros. Add to that two Xeon's E5 2630 V3s for $100. Combined, not each. Granted, these are old CPUs. I think these particular ones were manufactured in 2014, but it doesn't matter. They don't need to be powerful, as we're building a NAS to store videos, maybe an entertainment center and a web server, and definitely not a gaming system. Plus, you're keeping them out of landfills, which is always a good thing. There is downside though, and that is the fact they're not very energy efficient, but for the most part it's not that big of a deal, since they mostly run idle. With the CPUs I also received these chonky 2U cooling fins and the fans to go along with them, but I immediately replaced them with two Noctua NH-U9Ss because I wanted the system to run as silently as possible. Reason being, I wasn't going to put this masterpiece I was assembling into the basement where it is now. No, I wanted it in this office. And the traditional server fans are loud. And when I say loud, I mean very loud. I also put two 6TB Seagate IronWolf drives in here. These drives are specifically designed for NAS usage, which for the most part this server is. And as you can see, I had to make a lot of effort to cram them in. In fact, they're the reason this server is out of the rack, but more on that shortly. These drives are plugged into this HBA card here. HBA, or host bus adapter, is basically a card that turns PCIe lanes that come from the CPUs and turn them into either SAS or SATA ports. And for me, it serves the following purpose. When creating virtual machines through a software called QEMU, you can also pass through a certain piece of hardware. Pass through means that the host machine completely ignores a certain device. It doesn't even load the drivers. It passes complete control over that device to the guest machine, which then has direct hardware access. There is no translation layer in between the guest OS and said piece of hardware. I have set it up like this because the first iteration of this server ran Proxmox as the operating system, and TrueNAS was just a virtual machine with hardware access to the HBA. But I soon discovered that Proxmox, at least for my needs, was complete overkill. Which is why I then wiped this idea and went with TrueNAS Scale as the host operating system. Why Proxmox to begin with? Well, at the time of building this server, TrueNAS Scale wasn't even a thing yet. There was TrueNAS Core, which is based on BSD, and BSD for my taste isn't the best hypervisor if you need to run virtual machines on your server. So now with TrueNAS on bare metal and me needing more storage for these videos, I decided I'll look into expanding my rack with a 1U JBot from QNAP. I didn't order it yet, but plan to in the following days. From what I read from the specs, this particular JBot comes with an additional PCIe HBA card, similar to the one I'm taking out. That card connects JBot to the server and presents the drives in it as if they were mounted inside this server. And I get 4 more drive bays, so I can make even more YouTube videos. Win-win-win. Oh, by the way, if you want me to make a review of the JBot and an assembly video once it arrives, leave a comment down below and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. What else do we have here? The graphics card, NVIDIA Quadro T400. Now, if you look at the prices of new Quadros, you'll see they range into thousands of dollars. But not the T400, as I think it's one of the oldest models you can get on eBay for around $60. So why do I have it then? Well, because it has a dedicated NVENC chip on it, which means I can transcode videos on the Plex server in real time. This is not a sponsor plug, I actually need your help, so please hear me out for 35 seconds. With my router project, I was recently accepted into the best hardware incubator in the region. I won't go into more details as I'm preparing a dedicated video about that, but as part of a, let's call it market research, I want to learn whether home lab enthusiasts care about 10 gig speeds in their home networks, as we plan for this router to have 2 10 gig ports. So, all I'm asking is that you leave a comment in which you answer how much do you care about 10 gig connectivity, regardless if you currently have it or not, and why. The more details, the better. Thank you. Next card worth mentioning is this M2 adapter card. Apart from the M2 NVMe slot itself, it also has two M2 SATA ports to which it only provides power. For data transfer, it comes with two regular SATA connectors on the back of the card. While it might look odd at first, it's actually perfect for my use case. You see, the motherboard is too old to have an M2 NVMe connector on it, so we gain one on the card which is meant to run the operating system. I don't need any redundancy in this case as I don't run anything else on it and all the configuration is backed up regularly. And then there's the two SATA drives which serve as the guest operating system storage. These two, much like the Seagate Iron Wolves, are also configured in ZFS RAID 1 config, which means one is the exact replica of the other, so I'm still left with all the data intact should one die. The last and most boring card is the 10 gigabit NIC. This is Mellanox ConnectX 3, which at this point is like 10 years old and you can still get them on eBay for less than $30. Do I need a 10 gig network card, you might ask? Yes, because my Ruckus switch also has several 10 gig ports on and one of them is occupied by my Mac Studio back there. And having 10 gig link to your NAS is surprisingly convenient. I use this DAC cable to connect the two, but you could also run fiber with these Intel 10 gig SFP Plus modules that I got on eBay as well, and I paid $80 for 10 of them, as I wouldn't be a true nerd if I didn't run fiber throughout my house. Now you might ask, does this case have any drawbacks? Well, yes, it does. It's expensive. I think I paid around 300 euros for it. And given I bought the rest of the components, sans the Seagate hard drives, for roughly the same price, almost half of the cost of this server was the case alone. I guess this is what being stubborn gets you into. It did come with a PSU though, but it was only a 300 watt one, so I opted to replace it with a bit more powerful Seasonic G750. I'll leave the link in the description. This particular one was also chosen because it's a relatively shallow one, which meant I could still fit the discs into the base. So, there you have it. This is my home server in what's probably the shallowest 4U rack mount server chassis on the market. I've had it for almost 4 years now, and I imagine with the upgrade, it'll serve me at least 4 more. See ya!